Hello, friends. This is Confessions with Amy, and I'm glad you're visiting my channel. Here we share new confessions every day.
I didn't cry. Not when he said the words. Not when the HR rep avoided my eyes. Not even when I stood in the elevator with a cardboard box in my arms, balancing a mug that read Boss Lady, a gag gift from a junior associate who had since left for Google. It was a Tuesday. It always is, isn't it? Bad news never comes on a Friday. They want the rest of the week to sweep you out with the trash. His name was Clive Harrow, DP of Strategic Operations at Ferrix & Lennox, a sleek consultancy firm in Midtown Boston. High-rise glass walls, espresso machines with beans flown in from a volcanic hillside in Guatemala, and an entire department dedicated to corporate mindfulness. Clive wore a tailored navy suit and always smelled like a cedarwood candle that cost more than my mortgage. He called me into his office with that bland, corporate smile that meant one of two things: a bonus, or a knife in the back. It was the latter. "We've had to make some difficult decisions, Delaney," he said, resting his palms on the desk like a priest about to deliver last rites. "With the restructuring, we're eliminating your position. It's not about performance. You've been valued. Valued. Past tense." My inbox was already locked by the time I got back to my desk. 22 years. I started there before Clive even graduated. I survived 4 CEOs, a merger, a hostile takeover, and an office fire in 2011 that I personally helped evacuate. But Clive wanted newer. Shinier. Younger. Someone with a podcast and too many bracelets. I didn't argue. Didn't ask why me. I'd seen enough boardrooms to know how the game worked. Instead, I packed. The box was heavier than expected. 2 framed photos, one of my daughter, Camille, now in college, the other of my parents at their wedding. A brass paperweight shaped like a lion. 3 hardcover notebooks. A half-dead succulent. And that mug. I nodded at the receptionist on the way out. Her name was Bryony. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe "I'm sorry, maybe this is bullshit," but she stayed silent. That's how it goes. Office politics run on silence and sealed lips. Outside, Boston was thawing from a brutal winter. Slush lined the sidewalks. A wind blew in from the harbor, sharp and mean. I stood there, box in hand, and thought. You took my title, Clive. You took my salary, my parking spot, my seat at the table. But you forgot one thing. You forgot who built the damn table. They say it's the loud ones you should watch, the ones who storm out, slam doors, send scorched earth emails at 2 a.m. But no. It's the quiet ones you should fear. The ones who leave without a scene. The ones who wait. I didn't post about my next chapter on LinkedIn. I didn't send Clive a thank you note. I didn't even correct the email blast that said I had retired early. Let them think I was done. That I'd fade into the suburbs and take up gardening. I was already renting a small workspace in South End by the end of the week. One of those co-working hubs with exposed brick and cold brew on tap. Too many 20-somethings in oversized hoodies and noise-canceling headphones. But I kept to myself. Head down. Head clear. I started with a spreadsheet. Names. Projects. Clients. Pain points. All the little things that don't show up on dashboards but determine if a contract gets signed or doesn't. I remembered everything. I always had. There was Garrett Langford, from Emberwave Tech. He used to call me at 7:30 a.m. before board reviews. There was Moira Chen, who once sent me a handwritten thank you card after I fixed a budget forecast the night before her pitch. There was Elijah Moreno, who wouldn't let anyone else touch his data models except me, said I had magic hands. They trusted me. Not Ferrix and Lennox. Not Clive. Me. I didn't poach. I didn't need to. I just reached out. Checked in. Asked how things were going now that I was gone. One by one, they started replying. Some confused. Some frustrated. Some interested. Meanwhile, whispers were starting to stir at Ferrex. Bryony, the receptionist, started forwarding me screenshots. Anonymous. Client delays. Mismanaged deliverables. A junior analyst promoted too quickly, she'd tanked an entire pitch to a Fortune 500 exec. They were unraveling. And no one knew where I was. I kept it that way. For now. By mid-April, I had a name for the company. Rhodes and Slate. It sounded established, solid. Like it had always existed. I registered the LLC, bought the domain, and called an old friend from college who owed me a favor, a brilliant designer who mocked up a full brand identity in one weekend. I wasn't trying to look like a startup. I was building the illusion that we'd been here for years, a quiet powerhouse hidden in plain sight. Because while Clive and his new hires were chasing hashtags and influencer webinars, I knew the truth. Reputation isn't built online. It's built in the silence between the meetings. And my silence was about to get very loud. 3 weeks after I left Ferrex and Lennox, the calls started. Not to me. To them. Clive's team started missing check-ins. Monthly review reports got delayed. Clients weren't returning emails. One account manager, a smug little climber named Kyle with gelled hair and "disruption is my love language" on his LinkedIn, posted a panicked question in an internal Slack thread. Has anyone heard back from Langford's office? Their Q2 deck was due Friday. Just radio silence. Ghost clients. One by one. I never asked anyone to leave Ferrex. I didn't need to. When you've been the voice in someone's ear at midnight before a product launch, when you've rewritten their mission statement to make it actually mean something, they remember. They know who really showed up. And who was just pretending. Garrett Langford was first. He dropped off Ferrex's client list without a press release. No explanation. Just gone. A week later, Moira Chen's assistant requested to reallocate all active scopes. Translation? She pulled the plug. Elijah Moreno didn't say anything. He just sent me a message. 4 words. Ready when you are. Meanwhile, Clive was spinning. Bryony told me he started holding alignment huddles every morning at 8 a.m. He called them transparency touchpoints. The staff called them panic meetings. I watched it all unfold from the quiet corner of my co-working space, sipping burnt coffee and building something real. Rhodes and Slate was still technically just me, plus a freelance analyst in Vermont and a contract designer in Denver. But we moved fast. And no one asked how many employees we had. They only asked if I could do what Ferrex used to do. The answer was yes. And better. But this wasn't just about me rising. It was about him falling. Clive, with his smug boardroom metaphors and his obsession with optics over substance. He underestimated the one thing you should never forget in business. People remember how you made them feel. And Clive made people feel replaceable. He was starting to see it now. That he hadn't fired an employee. He had removed the spine of his operation. And his empire was starting to sag. But this? This was just the prelude. Because I hadn't just returned to the game. I was rewriting the rules. It started with a panel invite. The email came from a boutique leadership conference in Cambridge, mid-sized, but respected. They'd had names like Lisa Gerson from Echelon Equity and Dr. Dev Mishra from Genevex Capital last year. The subject line read, "Interested in joining our Women Rebuilding Power Roundtable?" I almost laughed. Not at the invite, but at the timing. Because just hours earlier, I'd gotten a message from Bryony. Clive's freaking out. Board found out about 3 major exits. They're asking questions. He blamed market instability. Classic. Classic indeed. I accepted the invite, submitted my bio, and for the first time in months, clicked publish on a LinkedIn post. No fanfare. No drama. Just. After over 2 decades of building legacies for others, I've founded Rhodes and Slate, a consultancy focused on strategic clarity, ethical growth, and real results. We believe in doing business like people still matter, because they do. We're open for business. #leadership, #strategy, #quiet power. It got more engagement in an hour than any Ferrex post had in 6 months. Garrett Langford reposted it with the comment, "There's strategy, and then there's Delaney Rhodes. We know the difference." Moira Chen commented a simple, "The real ones know." I wasn't hiding anymore. And Clive? He saw it. Bryony said he went pale when my post showed up in Ferrex's executive feed. He actually said out loud, "Rhodes and Slate?" And then he locked his office for an hour. I imagined him sitting in his overdesigned corner suite, surrounded by minimalist furniture and burning sandalwood diffusers, realizing the name he thought he erased was back, embossed, branded, and louder than ever. Except I wasn't louder. I was just visible. The panel came next. I wore a graphite suit and a deep red blouse. Not a power play. Just me. The room was packed. Someone from Inc. was in the back row taking notes. I didn't talk about Ferrex. I didn't mention Clive. I talked about resilience. About how companies forget that institutional memory walks out the door every time they restructure. I talked about how power doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it waits. And when it was over, 3 people handed me their cards. One of them whispered, "I think we're ready for a new direction. Ferrex doesn't feel anchored anymore." That word. Anchored. I felt it like thunder. I didn't leave that stage as someone who got fired. I left as someone who moved on before they fell behind. Clive hadn't just lost clients. He'd lost the story. And now? I was the one telling it. The invitation was too poetic to ignore. Ferrex and Lennox was hosting a legacy gala at the Seaport, celebrating their 20 years of innovation. Industry people. Clients. Press. I wasn't invited, of course. But one of my new clients, a tech investor who had just pulled a 7-figure contract from Ferrex, forwarded me the invite with a winking emoji. "You should be in the room. You earned it more than they did." So I went. I didn't sneak in. I didn't crash it. I walked through the front door with a +1 pass, wearing a black silk jumpsuit and heels sharp enough to cut through the tension in that marble floor lobby. The ballroom was a cathedral of ego, chandeliers, glass sculptures, a slideshow of Clive's face at least 5 feet tall rotating behind the buffet. He saw me during the cocktail hour. His jaw locked. His drink barely made it back to the tray. I didn't flinch. I smiled. Later, during the dinner, one of the older board members, a silver-haired man named Winthrop Ellis, who used to pretend I was a secretary during meetings, leaned over and said, "Your name's everywhere lately. Heard you picked up Emberwave MJC Systems, and..." He smiled like someone finally seeing the iceberg. "Moreno Tech, wasn't it?" I just sipped my wine. "You know what they say, Mr. Ellis, relationships outlast logos." After dessert, I left quietly. Just as I had the day I was fired. But this time I left with something else. Power. Not the kind they write about in press releases. The kind that lives in reputation. Loyalty. Trust built over decades and tested in silence. Clive didn't come after me. He couldn't. His hands were full, trying to stop the bleeding, trying to replace what he never really understood. I wasn't out for revenge when I started this. But let's be honest, justice, when done right, feels like revenge. Especially when the world gets to watch. Now? Rhodes and Slate has a waiting list. I built a leadership accelerator for women over 40. Camille, my daughter, is helping with the digital side. She says I'm finally cool enough to work for. And Ferrex? They're still posting about transformation. They just don't mention the part where they accidentally created their biggest competitor. Final words, spoken calmly, over a soft fade-out. You didn't just fire me, Clive. You fired the woman who knew where every thread was stitched. And when you pulled me out, you unraveled the whole thing.